Welcome to the Deep Dive, your express lane to being truly well-informed. We take complex topics, slice through the jargon, and hand you the most potent nuggets of insight. Today we're plunging into a subject that profoundly shapes our world, often kind of out of sight, out of mind, U.S. foreign policy. Specifically, the unseen cost of perpetual war. Our journey today is guided by some really powerful excerpts from Horton's illuminating work, The Unseen Costs of Perpetual War. We're going to embark on a deep dive that will first, confront the staggering human and financial toll of America's long-term conflicts. Then we'll ask the really uncomfortable question. After all that investment, what did American society actually gain, if anything? And finally, we'll peel back the layers to investigate the often hidden bureaucratic and economic forces that keep these policies in motion, sometimes, seemingly defying all logic, our mission. To give you a clear, concise understanding of these intricate issues, making sure you walk away with genuine aha moments, not just, more information overload.
And what's truly critical here, I think, and often overlooked, is exactly that point. How these discussions about the profound long-term impact of conflicts, they often just remain on the periphery of public discourse. They don't always get the sustained, direct attention that, frankly, their consequences demand. So yeah, we're going to pull them into sharp focus for you, connecting what can feel like abstract policy decisions to their very concrete real-world consequences, both abroad and, importantly, right here at home.
All right, let's confront the scale of this. Horton dedicates a significant part of his work to what he calls the post-9/11 wars. And when we use that term, we're not just talking about Afghanistan or Iraq. He's looking at a broader tapestry, right? Yeah. Conflict zones including Syria, Pakistan, Yemen. Have you ever truly stopped to consider the full expansive scope of their impact? It's a number that honestly almost defies comprehension.
It really does. And Horton's data is, it's truly devastating. When we look at the direct deaths resulting from these wars, we're talking about an estimated 900,000 to 940,000 lives lost. These are people killed, directly in combat or bombings. But then you consider the indirect deaths, the ripple effect from destroyed infrastructure, collapsed healthcare systems, food shortages, the breakdown of civil society, and that number just skyrockets to between 3.6 and 3.8 million.
Wow.
That's a catastrophic scale of human suffering.
Those numbers, they're so large they almost become abstract. But behind each one is a person, a family, a community, just irrevocably changed. And that's not just lives lost, is it? Horton also highlights the immense displacement.
Oh, absolutely. Beyond the direct and indirect casualties, Horton reports that these conflicts have resulted in 37 million people displaced from their homes. Just think about that for a moment. 37 million people forced to flee, to leave everything behind, their lives completely uprooted.
37 million.
That's more than the entire population of California suddenly without a home. It's an exodus of historic proportions, creating refugee crises and humanitarian disasters that reverberate globally.
And the financial cost is just as staggering, a sum that's almost impossible to visualize. What does Horton tell us about the economic price tag for these interventions?
Yeah, the financial cost alone is, it's mind-boggling. Overall, these interventions have exceeded an astounding $8 trillion.
$8 trillion.
Trillion. And to break that down further, imagine pouring $2.2 trillion just into Afghanistan and then another $2.9 trillion into Iraq and Syria.
Grief.
These aren't just figures on a spreadsheet. This is money that, could have been invested in domestic infrastructure, education, healthcare, green energy initiatives. It represents a monumental economic drain funded by taxpayers with opportunity costs that impact generations. It really makes you wonder, what could that money have achieved if directed elsewhere?
What struck me most in Horton's analysis, I think, is how these abstract, gargantuan numbers translate into immediate, heartbreaking realities on the ground. Let's zoom in on Afghanistan specifically, a conflict we were engaged in for 2 decades. Horton paints a grim picture of how conditions dramatically worsened for the Afghan people, even before the U.S. withdrawal. Can you elaborate on the severity of that decline? It's just shocking.
That's a stark illustration, of the hidden costs beyond direct conflict. Horton details how food insecurity in Afghanistan, for instance, it escalated from 62% of the population to a shocking 92%.
92%.
Imagine almost everyone you know struggling daily just to find food. Child malnutrition tragically rose from 9% to 50%. Half of all children are malnourished.
Half.
And poverty, it climbed from 80% to 97%. These aren't just statistics. They describe a society pushed to the absolute brink, teetering on the edge of total collapse. And this is a direct consequence of prolonged conflict and the breakdown of, all systems.
And beyond the direct and indirect casualties in the conflict zones themselves, Horton also shines a light on the hidden tragedies, right? The costs often overlooked right here at home. It's a profound and often unacknowledged domestic price tag that, well, it really demands our attention.
Absolutely. Horton reveals a particularly devastating domestic cost. During this period, 30,000 U.S. veterans committed suicide.
30,000.
30,000. To put that in perspective, that number is actually higher than the number of U.S. soldiers killed in combat in those same wars. Many of these individuals were caught in a terrible self-perpetuating cycle of over-medication, particularly with psychoactive drugs, desperately trying to cope with the immense trauma they experienced and the challenges of reintegrating into civilian life. It's a sobering reminder that the war doesn't end when the soldiers come home. Its echoes continue to inflict pain and demand a profound, often unseen price from those who serve.
It truly reveals a profound domestic cost. So after all these immense human lives lost, all the suffering, the societies destabilized, the trillions with a T, trillions of dollars spent, Horton forces us to ask, what did American society actually gain in return for this staggering, often quiet investment? What was the payoff?
Horton's argument here is quite provocative,
Yeah.
And he doesn't pull any punches, outlining what he sort of sarcastically refers to as the failure dividend. He states unequivocally that these wars yielded essentially nothing for American society.
Nothing.
Essentially nothing. This isn't just a casual observation, it's a deeply researched conclusion. He points out that if there was any single positive outcome he could identify, it was the advancements in prosthetic technology for amputees. And even that, he notes, comes with a bitter irony.
Wow.
This raises an important question for you to consider. If the societal gains were so minimal, how does Horton explain the continued political and public acceptance for such prolonged engagement? What are the underlying beliefs, that allow this failure dividend to persist without massive public outcry?
That's a profoundly cynical view, maybe, but one that Horton seems to back up with data. But surely there were some objectives cited by policymakers at the time, right? Was it about promoting democracy, counterterrorism? How does Horton sort of dismantle those initial justifications?
Well, he meticulously examines those justifications and finds them, frankly, wanting. He argues that while stated objectives might have included stability or counterterrorism, the results consistently show a lack of measurable success in those areas, and often an exacerbation of the very problems they sought to solve.
Right.
He suggests that the real beneficiaries were not the American public, nor the people in the conflict zones. Instead, Horton highlights a stark contrast. While American society, broadly speaking, gained essentially nothing, defense contractors like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, they saw their profits soar. This isn't just a side note, it points directly to a key economic driver that seems to operate independently of any measurable societal benefit. It creates a powerful incentive for the continuation of these conflicts.
So it's not just a lack of gain for the public, but a clear, measurable gain for a specific industry. That certainly puts a different spin on the why.
Yeah.
To truly grasp how these patterns of intervention, immense cost, and minimal societal return persist, we need to trace the roots back a bit further, maybe, beyond 9/11, to another pivotal moment in U.S. foreign policy, the period immediately following the Vietnam War.
Indeed. After the draining experience of the Vietnam War, President Nixon faced a significant challenge: how to appease the powerful military-industrial complex, which was deeply concerned about a potential downturn in business due to public war weariness. His ingenious yet ultimately problematic strategy involved significantly boosting arms sales abroad.
Okay.
He needed to find new markets for American weaponry.
And who was the primary customer in this new arms sales push? Where'd they look?
Nixon found a willing partner in Iran, which was then under the autocratic rule of the Shah. The Shah, in turn, harbored this deep obsession with appearing first world and being a regional superpower. This vanity, combined with the U.S. push, led him to an almost unsustainable level of spending on cutting-edge U.S. fighter jets, specifically the F-4s and F-14s.
Really?
Yeah, Horton notes that the Shah was buying more advanced aircraft than even the U.S. Air Force was purchasing at the time.
Wow.
What's fascinating here is how domestic political pressures, the need to keep the U.S. defense industry thriving, can directly influence international arms trade, pouring fuel onto regional arms races and, as we saw later, contribute directly to deep political and economic instability.
And that unsustainable spending and burgeoning resentment within Iran, fueled by the Shah's lavish lifestyle and authoritarian rule, ultimately contributed to what became, well, the inevitable Iranian Revolution in 1979.
Exactly. And Horton highlights a gross miscalculation by both the CIA and the Carter administration regarding Ayatollah Khomeini, the figurehead of the revolution. In a stunning display of what Horton characterizes as naive or self-interested incompetence within U.S. foreign policy circles, they mistakenly believed Khomeini was not so bad.
Not so bad. Really?
Some even went so far as to liken him to an Iranian Gandhi, failing completely to grasp the profound religious and political radicalism he represented. This was a critical juncture where a profound lack of understanding, or perhaps a willful disregard for the realities on the ground, led to a colossal strategic blunder, shaping decades of future U.S. foreign policy challenges in the region.
So, if history is littered with these kinds of miscalculations, immense costs, and frankly minimal gains, it begs the question, how do these bad policies, once established, become so incredibly difficult to change, even when the evidence of their failure seems clear? This brings us to a really powerful concept from economics, a lens through which Horton examines this phenomenon: public choice theory.
Right, public choice theory. It emerged from libertarian economics, and it offers a compelling and, frankly, quite cynical framework here. Its core tenet is that the concept of national interest, what's supposedly best for the country, is often, in practice, simply the sum of the private interests of the decision makers involved.
Private interests.
Yeah, to really grasp this, think about it this way. Instead of a national interest being a single objective North Star, Horton suggests it's often a mosaic built from personal career ambitions, the budget priorities of specific departments, even the biases of the individuals making those high-stakes decisions. Bureaucrats and policymakers, much like anyone else, tend to prioritize protecting their careers, their departmental budgets, their status, over consistently pursuing objective truth or the most effective, efficient in policy.
Okay.
It raises an important question for you to consider. How often do we assume national interest is this monolithic objective goal rather than a composite of many individual agendas, often, self-serving?
And you can see how this plays out in the real world, right? Government positions and entire policies often become based on what Horton calls consensus narratives, rather than on what's truly factual or effective.
Exactly.
Once a bad policy is established, changing course becomes incredibly difficult, almost impossible, because it would imply admitting error. And admitting error could deeply embarrass prior leaders, undermine institutional credibility, and, even jeopardize careers. It creates this powerful, self-reinforcing inertia where maintaining the status quo, no matter how ineffective or costly, becomes the priority. It's less about moving forward and more about, saving face.
To further illustrate this self-perpetuating nature of conflict and policy, Horton brings up a rather vivid and darkly humorous term coined by soldiers in Vietnam: the self-licking ice cream cone.
Right, I've heard that. Explain that.
This analogy perfectly encapsulates the dynamic. Wars, by their very nature, create chaos, instability, and new problems. These problems then, in turn, are used to justify the need for more war, more intervention, more resources, more defense spending. It ensures that the military-industrial system continually feeds itself, creating its own justification for continued existence, growing larger and more entrenched with each new crisis. It's a stark, almost absurd analogy for self-perpetuation.
And adding to this complexity, Horton discusses what we can term bureaucratic blindness. This is where people on the inside become almost trapped by their own exclusive access to classified information. Is that right?
That's the idea. They start to dismiss outside expertise, whether it's from academics, journalists, or even former colleagues, with this dismissive sentiment. What do they know? They don't have clearance.
Right, the need-to-know barrier.
Exactly. This creates intellectual echo chambers where dissenting views are often filtered out or undervalued, reinforcing existing biases, and preventing fresh perspectives from penetrating the inner circles of decision-making. It's hard to see the flaws when everyone around you agrees or is afraid to disagree. Indeed. Horton cites an interview with former CIA analyst Cynthia Storer, who explicitly revealed how deeply entrenched this problem is within intelligence circles. She described how that perception of having exclusive, privileged knowledge can lead to a kind of insularity, where the very act of knowing things others don't can paradoxically narrow one's perspective rather than broaden it.
Interesting.
The secret knowledge becomes a kind of psychological cage, making it incredibly difficult to objectively evaluate policy or even hear dissenting voices.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner, the citizen, trying to make sense of our world? We've taken a deep dive into Horton's work, revealing, I think, a clear, sobering picture of U.S. foreign policy. It's a cycle often characterized by misguided interventions, driven by bureaucratic self-interest, and inflicting truly devastating human and financial costs. The core insight here seems to be that these wars and long-term engagements are sustained less by grand strategy or genuine national security concerns, and far more by inertia, the powerful profit motives within the military-industrial complex, and the simple human desire for career preservation within the halls of power.
And understanding these systemic issues is absolutely crucial because it allows us, well, allows you to move beyond superficial explanations and demand more from our institutions. It fosters the kind of critical thinking necessary to question established narratives, to look beyond the headlines, and, hopefully, to demand greater accountability for decisions that carry such profound global and domestic consequences. Knowing these mechanisms exist is really the first step toward challenging them.
Okay, here's a provocative thought to leave you with, something for you to mull over after our deep dive today. Consider how these very mechanisms, the private interest influencing public policy, the reliance on consensus narratives over objective truth, and the intellectual echo chambers that dismiss outside perspectives, how might they play out in other large institutions you encounter, or maybe even in your own decision-making processes? How do we, as individuals and as a society, challenge established narratives and ensure that truth and genuine well-being are prioritized over, inertia and self-interest? Something to think about.